You want to make a sandwich? Okay, can you go upstairs and when we're done you can play with it? Okay, I'll call you when I'm done, okay? I'll see you soon, buddy. Hey, I'm Alex Radical from Board Game Co. and today I'm reviewing Bytes and the expansion Bytes New Recipes. The various sections are timestamped down below, so if you just want to hear about the expansion, you can jump to that area. If you want to hear about all of it, well, let's go ahead and jump into it. This is a game from Board Game Tables, and it's a re-implementation of a game called Beak Points that came out quite some time ago with some gameplay adjustments and thematic adjustments to the game. The general idea is you have these ants over here, they're going to be marching along the trail and eating food. As you collect the food, you're going to be wandering along the path, and we'll explain exactly how that works, but you're going to eventually make your way to this pyramid at the end, which will determine how you're going to score at the end of the game. Along the way, you're going to have 4 different cards that define how each game operates. Every single game operates slightly differently when you play it, and so let's just go through a turn. As your turn, you're going to go ahead and grab one ant, any ant, they're not tied to a color, so let's say I am my turn, I grab the red ant, and I'm going to pop over to the red apple. From there, and you have to go to the fruit matching your color or the food matching your color. From there, I can take the token before or after the ant. In my case, I'm going to grab that grape. We're going to have another player. They're going to go ahead and hop to the ant of their color, the food of their color. Now, because the ant behind them is occupying that food, they can go one further behind. They'll go ahead and take that wine token. We'll have another player who goes ahead and moves the red, again, popping to the next red on the path. You're always jumping forward to the next food that matches the color of that ant, and they're going to go ahead and grab a grape as well. Now that I've locked in on grape, they kind of want to align their fates with me, which is not the worst move to go ahead with. From there, I'm trying to see if I can get my hands on that. I can only, if I can't get my hands on another grape, let's pretend it's my turn again, I'm going to go ahead and move this ant forward over here, grab a bread token. We'll have another player go ahead and grab to the green over here, they'll grab a chocolate, and then the next player sees their opportunity, they're going to jump to this grape, and they're going to grab this red, and you go round and around, slowly moving forward on the track, grabbing different tokens, just moving to the next token of their color, and jumping around to any token they can to get the various items they want. So that's going to be a little red cheese over there, and you're wandering along the track trying to collect tokens. But why are you doing so? Eventually you're going to get to a point where you've moved far enough along the track that you've made your way to the tower, or close enough. Let's say this token was gone over here, then I'm over here. At this point, the next move you make means you go to the tower. You're going to go ahead and move to the tower, and this is where things start to change depending on the game, although the truth is things could have changed up until now as well. The general idea is once all players have made their way, once all ant colors have made their way to the tower in different ways, you're going to look at the various points in the tower, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and every single token is worth the points multiplied by the number of that tower. So all apples right now, because red made their way there first, all apples are worth 4 points. So if you're able to collect a bunch of apples, that means you can score a lot of points in this game. And so the game is a combination of trying to gather tokens and trying to ensure the ant that matches the tokens you have the most of makes their way to the tower first. That's the basic idea of the game. The problem, or not really problem, but the difference is that you're going to have additional cards that change up the game every single time. There are 5 basic colors of food, and those 5 basic colors are going to match the ants, but you may have noticed there is no ant for chocolate nor any ants for wine. And that's because there are no ants for chocolate or no ants for wine. Instead, those tokens can be acquired by ants jumping next to them. So a red ant over here can go ahead and pick up the chocolate easily enough, and you can trade those tokens in or collect them based on the chocolate and wine cards you have in play. In general, the game has 4 cards that mix up the game every time you play. You're going to have the red card over here, which defines how ants make their way to the tower. So for example, right now, when ants get to the anthill, they take the highest available space. The first ant to the anthill defines that color as being worth the most. But there are different cards in the game that will define how and why ants move to the tower. It's not always first there to get the highest spot. Then you have the wine card, which defines why you want wine tokens. In this case, each wine is worth 1 point for each different type of food you have at least one of. In other words, if you have all 5 foods, wine tokens are worth 5 points. That can be huge. That can be a big deal gathering those wine tokens because that's worth more than any other tokens are worth. Your Craver over there is, instead of your turn, move an ant back to the start of the trail and take 2 moves with it. So you can trade in chocolate. Again, some of these tokens you're holding onto, sometimes you're trading them, but you can trade in chocolate to move an ant to the beginning of the trail, taking new tokens, taking 2 moves with that token. And then lastly, the blue card is a bit of a twist to the entire game. It doesn't fall into a specific criteria. It's not something that defines what moves up in the tower. It's not something that defines the wine or the chocolate. Instead, that last blue card simply defines a twist to the game. In this case, Picky, where you're going to go ahead and give these tokens out to the players before the game begins, these smaller little tokens, and they're going to be given randomly. And what you're going to do is you're going to take one of these tokens, and that all matching food to that token is worth an extra 2 points each. And so those little blue twist cards will give you a rule adjustment, either in a way you score points, a restriction, some extra element, whether possibly moving this little zebra token that only likes to go onto chocolate or wine. You'll have different logs, different gold tokens, different ways that they all enter the game. And that's basically Bytes. You're taking a turn, you're moving an ant along the trail, you're collecting the food before or after it, and you're trying to ensure that they end up on the pyramid in a way so that you can actually score as many points as possible. That's it. That's the game. That's the entire thing. Everything else comes down to the variability of the experience, which is incredibly high. This over here is the base game. We'll talk about the expansion soon, but the base game over here are all the cards you see over here. We have 4, 5, 6, 7 different cards. Is it 7 different cards to define how wine scores. Each wine is worth a point for each wine you have. Get a lot of wine that could cascade magnificently. Protege. 0 wine is worth -3 points, but gathering more and more wine could be worth a point up until you have 3, 4, or 5 doesn't really matter at all. Connoisseur, exactly one wine equals 7 points. Any other number equals 0. So you have to be mindful of that, and there's certain setup rules around that. Sommelier, counterfeiter, specialist, each wine token is worth 1 point for each food token you have for each food token of the type you have the most of. That can go very nicely with picky. If you manage to get a whole bunch of apples and your token is apple and you get wine, you can get a whole bunch of points that way. Then we have these cards over here that define how you move up the pyramid. Introverts. Ants take spaces on the anthill in this order, always taking the space earlier if it's available. So 4, 2, 0, 3, 1. They go in a specific order over there. Humble ants. When ants get to the anthill, they take the lowest available space. So instead of going to the highest, they're going to the lowest. Recycler. Before after your turn, pick up the 3 food tokens from the start of the trail. Keep 1, place the other 2 at the end of the trail. These are all ways you can trade in chocolate. Before or after your turn, choose a player to give you 1 food token of their choice, so you're stealing food from other players, which can be very impactful. Turbo. When moving an ant, skip the first food token that matches their color. That could either be a way to get to a specific spot on the trail, or a way to pop on over to the pyramid faster than other ants. Backward. Take a second turn, moving any ant backwards instead of forward. Take a food token as normal. So you can see these all break the rule, giving you some extra thing you can do when you trade in chocolate tokens. Slowpoke. The first player to move an ant over a stick, these will be set up on the board. First player to move an ant over a stick must take it. Each stick is worth -2 points. You're incentivized to move as slowly as possible, collecting as many tokens as you can. Merchant. If you move an ant past the merchant stand, which is actually in the box, they immediately trade 1 food token from your supply with 1 from the anthill supply. Zebra. The zebra ant stops on chocolate. This is this ant over here. It gets proxied into the game. You're going to go ahead and stop on wine and chocolate instead. At the end of the game, remove the zebra ant from the anthill and replace it with the ant that you replaced it with. Miner. Each gold token is worth 5 points. We're going to be putting gold tokens on the last 3 quarters of the trail. If you can get that, that can be worth extra points to you. And that's all, well not all, some of the various blue cards you'll have as far as the effects go. And that's everything base game. Which means, let's go ahead and talk about the expansion. Expansion just does more stuff. All those cards that you enjoyed from the base game, it's just giving you more variety. If you want more variety in your Bytes experience, we just have more cards. We have Quantum. This is a very tricky one. When ants get to the anthill, they take the 2 space. The active player moves ants on the 2 space to the highest or lowest spot available. So effectively, you're kind of pushing the ants that were there beforehand to the highest or lowest spot. We have more ways of trading in wine. Wine pairing. Each wine is immediately paired with a food token in your collection. The food token is worth double, so wine getting paired with the right tokens could be huge, but you're immediately pairing it, so you want to be mindful of the fact that you may or may not know the value of that token as you go. Amnesia. Each wine is worth 1 point per more than the most valuable food token missing from your collection. That could be huge. If you make sure to not have any 4s, all your wines are worth 5, but it's tricky because you have to plan around that. We have more ways of trading in chocolate. We have elephants. Elephants are a tricky one where you're going to be laying down ants on their side, and those ants cannot move until the start of your next turn, giving you a lot of control to either move the ants you want or prevent them from hitting the pyramid. It's not actually called a pyramid, by the way. It's called something else entirely. The anthill. That makes much more sense. It's called the anthill. Dizzy ants. After your turn, switch the places of an ant on the food track with the next ant in front of it or behind it. You cannot switch ants with ants already in the anthill. Then we have Stink Bomb. We have Cuckoo for Cocoa. And then we have the blue cards that give you more twists. We have the Ratatouille. That's going to give you a bunch of recipe cards. Recipe cards that as you collect tokens, you can trade them in for the points there, although those tokens won't count for endgame scoring, so you want to be mindful, are you trading in low scoring tokens or not? We have sticky ants that you're going to put gum on the track, and ants on those tokens will get stuck. We have leftovers where any food tokens at the end move forward, so you're going to have a lot more recycling, so to speak. We have underdog story. At the end of the game, place all unused food tokens in the box. Without looking, draw 3. Each token drawn will move the corresponding ant 1 space up on the anthill. So basically, the tokens that were least, the tokens on the track that were the least taken will affect those ants, pushing them up on the track, which is why it's called underdog story. The seemingly underperforming tokens actually push you up. Tribute to Grasshoppers, which is going to give you these grasshopper tokens where you can score extra points for those. We have Spoiled Food. Randomly draw one of these small food tokens, that's these that you have in the base game over here, and remove 3 of that food type. Draw another, remove 2, draw another, remove 1, so it's decreasing what you have on the track. Then we have Magnifying Glass, which is a tricky one, which you can have a Magnifying Glass token. Worth noting, by the way, all expansion components are all prototype, everything, rules, components, all that stuff, subject to change. But the Magnifying Glass is going to allow you to basically zap ants. Ants that aren't moving quickly enough, you'll be losing food tokens from those ants. And then we have the Beetle, which is another token that will be moving along with the ants, and food and ants are inaccessible when the Beetle is on the space. And if the Beetle outpaces any ants, well, then it's going to get to the anthill and another ant will score 0 points. That's basically what we have as far as the expansion. I don't think I went through every card, but I went through most of those cards over there as far as what we have for expansion cards. And so the expansion is just adding variability to your game. If you want more variability, more cards, more options, more wine combinations, more chocolate, more ways to get on the anthill, more general twists to the game, you're going to have all of that from the expansion cards. Which brings us to the review part of the game, starting off with ease of play. This is a board game tables game, which means rules are 2 pages. Every single board game tables game I've played has a rulebook that is that large. Their games are incredibly accessible, incredibly easy to dive into. That seems to be a criteria to be a board game tables game. So yeah, you can read 2 pages of rules and you're off to go. Off to the races, thematically speaking. As far as player count, this is a 2 to 5 player game. I've played this at 3, 4, and 5 players. Surprisingly enough, or maybe not surprisingly enough, 2 is actually rated really well on Board Game Geek. I have not played it at 2, but it is rated very well. I can't speak to that player count, but 3, 4, and 5, I would say 5 drags a little bit. 3 and 4 are very solid, and even 5 is okay. Just you're doing less things and more players are involved. Although this is a good time to mention, there is a way you can do something called double bites, where if you have an extra set of the tokens, that if you bought it when you got the game, you can have a full extra set of tokens and have twice as many tokens on the track. A few cards do modify rules around that, but it's fairly easy to just have those extra tokens and dive into it. As far as what I like, don't like, and can see others not liking, first of all, the components in general for board game tables, they generally do a solid job with the components, and that's true here as well. Every single one of these tokens is double layered, giving it a unnecessarily premium feel to the tokens. I mean, I'm not complaining, I like them, but that's, yeah, in general, Board Game Tables does a fantastic job with the components. The basic game concept is incredibly accessible, incredibly easy to dive into, and fairly rewarding what it's doing. It's all about moving an ant, take a food, move an ant, take a food. It's incredibly simple, and yet it gives you a lot of choice and decision and strategy, especially once you combine the other cards in there. Do you want that chocolate token? Do you want the wine token? Which ant are you going to move forward next? Are you being mindful of the fact that if you move that ant forward, they can move it to the pyramid, the anthill, not the pyramid, they can move it to the anthill and score all your apples for 0 points. Do you want that? Do you play a chocolate so that they're now lazy, playing with the elephant expansion, and now the ant can't move, and you can control which ant moves forward in the next turn, and meanwhile you're playing a 4-player game, so other ants have to move. It's a very simple concept that is modified by the twist. There's a ton of variability to the game, both base game and then even more so when you add in the expansion. There's just a ton of options to dive into this very simple, very accessible core puzzle, but mixing up and twisting and adjusting those experiences along the way. And it's quick playing as well. The game comes in roughly maybe 30 to 45 minutes. It can drag a little bit if you're playing with kids, I can say that much, but it's a fairly quick game for the experience you're getting out of it, and it's a solid gateway game too. Again, the simple rule set makes it very, very accessible, very easy to dive into, and the variability from the cards modifies it. And the cards all have little notes on them telling you how complicated they are, whether 1, 2, or 3 stars, allowing you to cater the game to whatever group you're playing with. There's a lot of stuff going on here that just makes the game fun and easy, and if you want to add more to the things you're doing, but also add more to the game time, that big bites or double bites, whatever it's called, the extra tokens on the board, gives you more experience, more ways to just have collecting. The collecting part is part of the fun, being able to wander your ants along the track, and different things twist how you proceed. Are you aggressively moving forward because you want to get that one ant that's going to help you to the top of the anthill? Or are you playing with the lazy, whatever, the things, these pieces of wood or whatever, where you're collecting them, slowpoke, where you're going to be collecting wood every time that you're going to be getting negative points, and so you're trying to move all the ants as slowly as possible, and if you do that combined with Overachiever, that card over there, you're still playing this interesting balance of when are you willing to accept that one negative 2-point jump in order to actually get ahead and get all those extra points from all the tokens you've been gathering. It's a very simple, very accessible concept that is modified and adjusted based on the various cards in play. As far as what I don't like, the chocolate and wine sometimes feel a little less worth it depending on the specific cards you're playing with. And wine less so. I think the wine generally has its own economy trade-off, and it's more situational depending on the tokens you've gathered at any given point. But sometimes the chocolate, I find, gathering certain chocolate tokens at certain, depending on the cards you have in the game, doesn't always feel as worth it, just in general. Forget within the individual game of what you're doing, just it feels like you're trading two actions for one return sometimes, which doesn't feel worth it. And that's sometimes made worse with the Double Bytes expansion, when you have to increase the cost, but it doesn't feel like you're getting twice the benefit quite as much. So I tend to find that when I play this game, I take the chocolate sparingly. The wine I take depending on how things are going in the game, and then sometimes the chocolate's amazing, sometimes not so much. It just depends on the game state. Additionally, some combos or scoring feel a little harder to find your pathway through. A good example would be if you have Slowpoke combined with Overachiever, what do? Do you aggressively move past that stick? Not so much. What about this Quantum Portal over here? How easy it is to kind of predict what happens. Aggressively getting to the first spot guarantees you're not getting, but maybe you are getting because you're getting to the 0 or the 4. You can jump up or down. There's some interesting twists as far as how complicated the game gets with some of these cards. Nothing's overly crazy, but some of them are easier to see that pattern as you're moving different ants up the trail. As far as what I can see others not liking, first of all, this is a stock-taking game in its general concept, meaning you're trying to gather stocks, otherwise known as the various food tokens, and then you're trying to see how much those stocks are worth, which is the positioning on the anthill. And some cards, by the way, will give you the ability to move other ants up or down the anthill, occupying the same spots with other tokens, other ants sometimes, so that's an interesting twist there. But in general, it's a stock-taking game. If you don't like that stock-taking element, that I'm trying to grab apples, now apples at the end of the game might be worth 0, they might be worth 4. What's happening? You're trying to take that gamble that they're going to be worth big. You're trying to pay attention to what other players are doing. Are they going for apples? Will that help me? If we share apples, we're both incentivized to get red to the top. If we don't share apples, I can score big if I get red to the top. So it has all the stock-taking elements, very abstracted. It's not immediately clear that's a stock-taking game, but if you don't like that genre, then, I mean, that's not for you. And then additionally, along with being a stock-taking game, you have that aspect of the gamble. The fact that you collected a lot of apples, but those apples are now worth 0, and that might be frustrating. You might have planned the whole game around a high, hardcore apple strategy, which you probably shouldn't do if you're not comfortable with it going to 0, because that's what can happen. If you heavily invest in a stock and the stock tanks, you're going to have no points, and that can happen when you're playing this game. As far as what the expansion adds, the expansion just adds variability to the experience. If you just diving into Bytes for the first time today, you don't need the expansion at all. The base game will give you all the content you need to last you for enough games. Now, what enough is, that's up to you. The red cards you do run out of very quickly in the base game. The base game has a lot of wine, a lot of chocolate, a lot of the game twists, but only a few red cards. The expansion adds only one red card, but again, as soon as you start diving into it, the expansion just adds more variability. As with the base game, some cards are more fun than others. The magnifying glass is an interesting twist that forces you to keep players moving. And then the interesting thing is the way you combine all these cards, the way you combine the chocolate versus the wine versus the red card, the way you move with the anthill. Any one of these combinations gives you another way to dive into it, and the expansion is just adding more variability. That's a good thing if you're diving into the game. It's unnecessary if you're going to play this game twice and move on. As far as final thoughts on rating on this one, Bytes. Bytes took the game Beak Points and added a lot more to the game. First of all, the thematic aspect to it. Beak Points was a game of moving tokens along a track, plain and simple, that's all it was. It took any sense of theme out of this game, and I like the sense of theme that is added here. It's very charming to build up this trail and have the ants moving along the trail, although as you take food, it becomes harder to trace the trail, which is what I said in the beginning there, but how you kind of want to actually make something a little bit more structured, because otherwise it starts to fall apart. But Bytes took the game, Beak Points, and gave it a theme that is very charming, very accessible. It took the game and added all these cards to it that make it very variable at the same time. It took a basic, clean concept and made it a much better game. This is a 3.5 out of 5 to me. It's got a lot of charm. It's a solid Gateway Plus game. There's enough accessibility to, again, 2 pages of rules. That's all it is. Every Board Game Tables game has that, and I find it so compelling that they consistently put out games that are enjoyable while consistently sticking to that limitation that they've put on themselves of just very, very few rules. They might actually have more than 2 pages in some games. Their rules are always very short and very accessible, and I really, really respect what they're doing with that. So yeah, highly accessible, highly variable, very easy to dive into, and a solid Gateway Plus game, especially in the sense that it leans into stocks, which is usually something that you tend to see in, well, a little bit outside of the Gateway Plus range. As far as other game recommendations, first of all, Long Shot the Dice game is going to be another stock gambling betting style game that is also very highly accessible, a roll and write game of racing horses around a racetrack. And then once you're ready to level it up a notch, Airlines Europe is a very solid game that takes that stock taking aspect and escalates it to a kind of a ticket to ride combined with stock taking, giving you the bunch of airlines that you're buying into and trying to control their presence on the board as you go through that. Designed by Alan Moon, I believe. And that's basically it. This is my review of Bytes. The expansion is currently on Kickstarter. I'll have a link to that down below. Base game is final, and the expansion stuff is all prototype components. Rules and stuff subject to change on that. Until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. Hope you found this video helpful, and as always, have a good one.